Hey fam, your girl is back. And today I want to talk about what I learned from the past 3 years of being a documentary filmmaker. And honestly, this sounds wild to me, but yesterday I woke up and I saw a friend tag me on a story on Instagram, and it was about my first documentary film ever. And yeah, it was 3 years ago, which was mind blowing. But anyways, I've had a lot of projects since then, mainly in the branded documentary field, and I've wanted to tell you what I've learned. So hopefully, this is helpful to you. So yeah, let's go. So tip number one is less gear tells better stories. Now, what I mean by that, I know it's so easy, when you're planning for a shoot to just start throwing everything in your backpack or in the Pelican case, and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna need that, and maybe I want like a top-down shot, and you just get everything and you have trouble carrying it, of course. But then later when you go on set, you just don't have the time for it, and you end up using only like 20% of the gear that you brought in. Now, don't get me wrong, it's good to have some backup, but honestly, I think you should, have like a kit, which is like a bit more minimal, and use that and get the job done instead of focusing on some fancy shots that aren't going to help you actually tell a better story, because you're going to be thinking more about the shot itself rather than the story your character is sharing. So with time, see what works for your style. Which is your camera of choice? Maybe have a B cam depending on, the shoot that you're going after. Keep your lighting also compact, and just have, a couple of things. Maybe only bring one thing extra, and leave room for experimentation when you're on the shoot. But honestly, I think this is all you need. Every time I'm working with DPs for projects and we hop on those pre-production calls, I bring the gear down a notch, because most of the time they want to bring more than they're gonna use, and from my experience it's really unnecessary. Again, have your backup, but keep it simple and focus on the story, because this is what's gonna shine afterwards. Okay, tip number two is trust your audience, because they're smarter than you think. I remember I had a pretty challenging client experience 2 years ago, and it was just because of that. We were working on the voiceover that our character was going to say in this branded documentary, and my client kept adding things that we need to express in that voiceover. But honestly, you don't need that. There is a saying that goes, show, don't tell. And I think this is also something that you need to implement in your videos. You don't need to tell everything. You need to, show it, and then your audience is going to connect the dots. Now, think about directors like Christopher Nolan. Like, see how complicated, his movies seem on the first glance? They're kind of like a puzzle. But why are they so successful and interesting? Because the audience feels like they're a part of it. Like when you're watching it in the movie theater, you feel like you're solving some kind of challenge. And I think this is the fun part. If you give your audience everything, like all of the elements that are already pieced together, it's gonna be a little bit boring. So back to that client, what I advise in that situation is that we tell less, and and make our audience think a bit more, and then look at that piece through their own perspective, and draw what's true to them. Okay, now moving on to tip number three, which is something that I love, and I think it's a hill I really die on, and that's show more of your character's world. Now, what do I mean by that? If you're making a documentary about a character who is doing something fun, for example, he's racing cars, let's say, and if you go and focus only on that, like you're filming him only on the track, prepping, for that race, and then the race, like the challenge that your character is going through, from start to finish, you show that, and that's it. This is gonna be a pretty boring documentary. What you need to show your audience is who your character is outside of the thing that they're doing. Because maybe you know the character better than your audience, maybe they're your friend, and you know that he has a wife, kids, or he likes reading books in his spare time, and basically all those elements that make a person who they are. You need to show that to your audience. Maybe, show a very contrasting scene of your race driver on the track, like very fast cuts, very emotional edit, like your audience is really drawn to that, they can feel the adrenaline pumping in their own body, and then switch to a very quiet and ambient scene of your character and his wife in their living room early morning sipping coffee, and show that side of your character's world as well. Believe me, when you do that, the whole palette of the character that you're showing on screen in their story is going to be so much fuller, and people are going to be able to resonate with that story on a lot more deeper levels than if you only focus on like the fun part, which is, the racing on its own. Moving on to number 4, which is kill your darlings. Now, when it comes to scripting and then later on editing, I've seen so many people, and probably me in the beginning as well, wanting to show everything. Like you're interviewing your character and you kind of believe that everything is important. And this kind of leads to the second point where I was telling you that you have to trust that your audience is smart enough. This is kind of similar because you don't need to tell everything. Better show it. And you have to train this inner creative muscle in you, which is going to be about what you need to cut out of your script, and then later on from, let's say, from the interview, because you don't need to say everything. There are some key moments that you need in order to shape the story, and of course other details to put in between, but other than that, you need to have a feeling. For example, when you're rewatching your edit and you're thinking, oh, should I include that, should I not? 99% of the time you shouldn't. So think about that, and with every edit that you do, try and cut a bit more out. And then with time and with experience, you're going to just feel what needs to be included in the story and what shouldn't. Honestly, I think this might be one of the hardest skills to master, but once you do, believe me, your work is really going to be seen differently. What helped me with that, apart from, doing a lot of edits and listening to a lot of interviews, is also just watching movies. And I'm not specifically talking about blockbusters, but just, analyzing, also like series, because they're really structured a bit differently than like movies, because you have a bit more of runtime. So see how the story is pacing throughout this whole thing. It's just very interesting, and with time you're just gonna have an inner feeling for how to do that. And lastly, an advice for my people who go on set is learn how to make creative decisions on a deadline. For me, as a director and producer, when I'm on set, I need to know everything. Like, honestly, my head needs to be a creative Bible, and every time someone comes to me and asks me a question, I need to make a decision right there on the spot. And I've seen a lot of people who struggle with that. They maybe don't feel confident enough to, take a decision right now. They may feel pressured by time. They need, to just sit down somewhere without the noise and be like, compare the options, but you don't have time for that. Most of the times the client is there on set as well, so you need to be that authoritative figure to make that decision. So how do you do that? Well, firstly, you need to really adapt, because on those sets, the situation every time is different. So not every time you're gonna be able to predict what kind of problem is going to occur, but most of the time you can do the work beforehand in order to avoid bigger problems in general. The pre-production is going to be your best friend in order to know the story, know the characters, do your pre-interviews, meet all of them before you start shooting if you can, or if not, just go earlier on set, ask them to be there earlier as well, and just have 20 minutes to an hour to talk with your characters, meet your team, meet your crew, talk with the client. And once you have a bit more information to work with, you can do that. Now, of course, experience helps a lot. Your first project is going to be hard, and that's okay, but you're going to learn new things about yourself as well and how you operate. For me, I just like being informed about everything. I want to see what everyone from my crew is doing. I'm not standing on the side just chit-chatting with someone or waiting for them to be ready. No, I'm there. I'm giving everyone pressure. I'm helping wherever I can. I'm observing my client and how they're feeling. If they're feeling a bit nervous, I try to work on that and see how I can, support that, and what we as a crew need to do in order for them to trust us a bit more. And all of those small decisions that I make them with a couple of goals in mind: to make the project better, tell a better story, and make my client feel secure that what we're doing is leading to the best outcome possible. So there you have it. This is my 5 piece of advice from 3 years of being a documentary filmmaker and a bunch of other stuff along with that. Um, but honestly, whoever is watching this, just go and film your first documentary film right now, because you're going to learn so much, and the way that you tell stories is really going to shine through with the more work that you put out. So go grab your camera and yeah, and have fun. And meanwhile, subscribe, like, comment, do all the stuff. I really love seeing you here. Until next time.